Migrating to Australia, midweek, live stream, casual style edition. I'm Grant Williams. I'm your host, host one, or is that host two? Or is it B1? Or is it B2? Who can be sure? I'm joined every week by definitely B1, Australia's friendliest, most accessible, most knowledgeable, um, kindest, most compassionate
Oh, I love it,
immigration
Grant.
lawyer, David Bongiorno. How are you tonight, Mr. Bongiorno?
Good evening, mate. I'm very good. I'm very, very good. And we're continuing tonight with our tradition of bringing people who've come here, made it, and their story. And the person we're talking to tonight is somebody who can help with an Australian obsession, the property. Everybody wants to buy a property. If you want to buy a property, we want to talk to Cynthia Peretz. And Cynthia has migrated from South Africa by way of Israel, and we'll get her story. But Cynthia, welcome to the Migrating to Australia podcast.
Thanks for having me on tonight.
We had to have you on because you're a buyer's advocate. Now, can you tell listeners in general terms what a buyer's advocate does?
Sure. So a buyer's the same way as you have when you're selling a home, you have a real estate agent. When you want to buy a home, you can take on the service of a buyer's advocate. So we help you research properties, locations, negotiate with real estate agents, and just make sure that you buy the correct property for your circumstances.
It's very important. It's very important because what are the tricks for first-time buyers, not just local first-time buyers, but people coming to Australia? What do people coming to Australia, if they want to purchase property, what do they need to be mindful of?
I think just going from my experience is making sure that what you're buying is sound. So an independent inspector is one of the key services that you should have inspect a property before you're going to sign, and also to know that contracts are legal documents. So you can't play around with them. It's not like you're offering, once you put pen to a paper, it's a legal document.
Now,
Do you find people first generation young purchasers and also people coming to Australia, do they understand the gravity of a contract?
No. They don't understand when you say to them, you should have the contract reviewed by a lawyer or a conveyancer. The first question I always get is, why? What will they do for me?
What don't they understand?
Well, I suppose every country's got its laws, and every country sells property in a different way. So again, just understanding that, if you've never bought a property, okay, there's so many different aspects of the land that you're buying. And also if you buy a house, to make sure, let's say that the renovations or everything that's in that structure has been legally built. And a contract will show you all those inclusions if they were done correctly, because otherwise your insurance won't cover you.
Cynthia, you mentioned that every country has some different laws and conventions when it comes to buying and selling property. But in Australia, we've also got the different states and territories. So can we perhaps leave the property issues aside for a little bit and talk to you about how you came to Australia, and perhaps open up with what were your thoughts when you first arrived here?
We came to Australia. We actually came to Australia on a holiday, and then at the time where I was living in Israel, and we went back, and there was a lot of unrest. We decided, my family lived here. We decided to put in our papers. We didn't know that there were such things as immigration agents, and it then took us 18 months, which was difficult. I thought that born as an English speaker, we still had to do all the English tests and everything else to come to Australia. And we landed here were not prepared, and maybe that's why, David, your services are key, because we didn't understand how it worked with, as I said before, with renting properties, buying properties, finding a job, opening up a bank account. You know, all those services that we needed help with. How do you get a driver's license?
They are very, very important considerations. Is that something that, I mean, you can empathise with people who are new to Australia? How did you learn by doing? Because you don't want new Australians coming in to learn by doing, because it's painful, isn't it?
Oh yes, we learned by our own mistakes. You know, I suppose we were just really lucky that we had people around us that could help. Like, to say, if you need to open up a bank account, you need to have an account. So go to the closest pharmacy, because if you have an account there, that will help you. I found Australians very, very friendly and very helpful, but you have to just have the confidence to ask the questions.
I think that's key, Cynthia, that Australians will help, but we won't usually approach first to see if you are having some difficulties. We're going to expect you to say, "Hey, mate, can you give us a hand with this one? Hey, mate, what's this mean, buddy?" And then we sort of open up. But I think we we expect people to um, have a crack, is the old saying. You got to have a crack at it, and if you don't understand it, or you're having a problem, just tap your mate on the shoulder, and he'll help you out.
Can I tell you what was a key for us? Well, I'm a very social person. So, one of the things that I got into straight away was groups. So, I joined the local swimming club, gym. I used to do folklore dancing at the local church. And through that, I just, going every week, people start talking to you. They ask you where you're from, what are you doing? And I found that support system, because that's what it becomes, really very, very helpful.
Are we like South Africans? How are we similar?
You're not. But but Australia, as in the land, having space, having the homes, um, the freedom is what's similar. Otherwise, I'm a very outspoken person, and the first thing people say to me is, be be very careful, because you just say it. So be careful about confrontation, because you just say it as you think. And Australians are not like that. They're a little bit more reserved. And that's also what then made me find my first job, was finding the right fit for my personality.
David, that was an interesting comment. I'm not too sure I agree with that. I think Australians don't mind if you have your say, but if you can't back up what you say, you'll be smashed down, and you'll be thought of well, got to use the term, David, the barbecue term. They'd go, he's a bit of a wanker, isn't he?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. In a past life, I worked as a journalist and spent some time in London, Cynthia, and I did drink with a lot of South Africans. So I can say Australians and South Africans do love a drink. That they do
Oh,
have in
definitely.
common.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That's it. Absolutely. So that's really interesting. I mean, you're South African, Israeli by marriage, and an Australian citizen. So
Yeah.
how long have you been here, and how long have you been working in the property sector, and how's it changed? Because every Australian is obsessed with owning a home or an apartment. Is that common in South Africa? Common in Israel?
Okay, in South Africa, yeah, that's very common. You buy a house. In Israel, you can't afford it, so most people rent. When we came here, we knew, well, we wanted to just build a home, because we thought, okay, Australia is going to be our last point of call. And I was always brought up, buy a home, have a roof over your head. But in Australia, when you look at the rents and you look at buying, if you can get a mortgage, it's actually more worthwhile to pay off your own loan than to pay somebody else's mortgage.
Cynthia, can I just pull up on that point a little bit?
Yeah.
I was watching a financial guy, a guy called Marcus Padley, on the TV the other morning, and he was recounting the situation of when he bought his first home in England, and I think it was 35 years ago or something.
Mm.
And he's now talking to his daughter about buying a home in, I think, in Melbourne. I'm pretty sure that's where she was. That's where he is. And he went through the value of the cost or the price of the home back then compared to now, and then the interest rates and the length of the mortgage and average wages. And his conclusion was that it's now far more affordable for someone to buy their first home than ever before. But I would contend that if you are one of the people who is not enjoying a professional standard salary, because it wouldn't be a salary, I would think now that with, I mean, I live in Melbourne's western suburbs, and you need 800,000 to get into the market here, and they're asking for a 20% deposit now rather than a 10% deposit, which is what was normal when I was in my 30s. And if people are part-time or on limited contracts, time-limited contracts, how is home ownership affordable for that category of people now in Australia?
If you want to own something and you can't buy where you live, you need to be open-minded to move to an affordable area. That is why, in my opinion, further down the southeastern suburbs, across to the west, but further
my
out.
point is, I live in one of those affordable suburbs. I live in one of those S-hole suburbs.
Yeah, but
It's
no
longer affordable.
For the next generation, they need to move maybe 2 suburbs further out in order to buy something that they can live in. Okay, so I want to ask you something, Grant. Would you buy a 1-bedroom, or would you maybe rather move 45 minutes out and have a 3-bedroom home? And
well,
that's where I find
I've been looking recently at regional, and I'm a freelance worker. I got no hope. I've got absolutely no chance, and at my age, ever buying a home. I don't put myself in the same category as a couple in their 30s, but I think that if you're a shop assistant nowadays without secure, no one's employment now is secure, unless you are in the professional class. And the big thing for me is getting the 20% deposit. If it's an 800,000 property, well, you are looking at a massive amount of savings to just get into the market.
Cynthia, are regional centres the answer, though? I mean, because I was reading a recent article that there's been a massive spike since COVID in the value of properties, and they're outstripping. What is it?
9% today. It was
just outstripping
regional Australia.
The regional areas have grown overnight, definitely, when COVID hit and people wanted more space, so they moved out. People that were living in smaller spaces at the time, it was more affordable to go to Ballarat or Bendigo if you're talking regional. But now the prices are a lot higher, so it's not cheaper to go. But there are still areas which are affordable. The thing is that it also depends on whether the bank's going to give you a mortgage. That's the first thing. So if you're only a part-timer, if the bank gives you the mortgage, that's one thing. The areas that I sell in, they only ask for a 10% deposit. A lot of the areas might be further, but if there's public transport and if people are working in the city, they're happy to catch their train. But I'm getting a lot of feedback that a lot of companies have gone hybrid. So people are looking to go further, because if they're only going into the office 2 days a week, they don't mind to travel for 2 days because they're getting work-life balance and they're getting a backyard. So if you, let's say, for instance, which you might not realize, if you go past like Craigieburn, Beveridge to Wallen or Kilmore, Wallen already becomes regional. As a first home buyer, you get the $20,000 first home owners grant. And there is public transport. There's a train. It only takes 45 minutes to get to the city. People don't realize that. So I find that that's how I educate people on open your eyes. I'll tell you where you're going to get the best value for your money. And then it's your call what you want to do with it. But I give you those options. That's what I want, especially for the first home buyers or the people with the smaller mortgages, is don't think I can't do it. Let's look to see how you can do it.
So you mentioned Wallen. Could you do you know in other states some other places that you would think at the moment are affordable?
It is. They haven't yet found a New South Wales area at the moment. I can't talk on it, but South Australia is still affordable. You move out, you can move more south. Still affordable, and Queensland. So much people are going there and buying it out. You don't have to go to Byron Bay.
Mm.
Well, you can't go to Byron Bay. No
No,
one
no,
normal
but
can go there now.
it doesn't have to only be Noosa and all those fancy areas that you've always wanted to go on a holiday. If you go further out, Townsville, there are areas, there are affordable areas, but I found people a little bit, can I use the word snobby in what they want? And if they're used to renting in a specific area, that's where they want to live. Well, you can't sometimes have your cake and eat it. So
no, those days are gone. I'll say Townsville. I lived in Townsville. I love Townsville. It's very, very hot, but for a place to live, if you don't mind being a long way away from, I think that's the issue. Is if you've got family in Melbourne, it then becomes very hard to do visits. But
Absolutely.
Townsville for a young family, what a fantastic city.
Even better Cairns. I'm very fond of both, holidayed in both. But the problem with Cairns is Port Douglas, and then everything's expensive in Port Douglas.
It's also sticky compared to Townsville.
After COVID, people are, yes, everybody wants their family, but they're willing to just move for the comfort. They're understanding that their money needs to get them something, and they will make a plan. I think a lot of the attitudes have changed, and people are seeing that there are opportunities. And you know what? The youngsters that want to have a family, they want to own a home. And the ones with a family want to be able to give their kids maybe that extra bedroom. They don't necessarily want to have 3 kids in a 1 bedroom. So let's move a little bit further out and we can split them. Do you know what I mean? We can get a 4-bedroom house kind of thing. So, the people that I'm helping and the younger ones, this is how I educate them. Whether they use my services or not, it's all about educating, because when we bought our house, the real estate agent did not tell us that we should have our contract read. The real estate agent didn't tell us that we bought a weatherboard house, we should have an inspector come and make sure that there's no termites and things like that. We didn't buy a lemon. Besides the fact that we still had to do work to the house, these are important factors. And if I can help a new immigrant understand these points, I will just sleep better, because it's just important.
David, who does the real estate agent work for?
The real estate agent, unfortunately, works for the vendor.
That's
Now,
right.
the
So
vendor,
so
the
you
vendor,
need your own. You need your own person looking out for you. But when it comes to
correct.
having the contract looked at, the
Yeah,
cheapest money you will ever spend is having your own lawyer
absolutely,
look at your
absolutely,
contract.
correct. It's something that it leads to heartbreak. There are three things you can do in this country, Cynthia. You can, or maybe it's more regulated now. You can do your own migration, you can pay your own tax or do your own tax return, and you can purchase your own property. Now, each one is three biggest things you'll ever do in your life: migrate, pay tax, and buy a property. And if you stuff them up yourself, you have no one to blame but yourself. Grant says it's the best money you could spend. Well, I think having a property buyer's advocate is also great money to spend. How long have property buyer's advocates been around for?
Oh, they have been around, but just it was always a service that people with money that were time poor used. Now people are realizing over the last maybe 4 years, more in the 4 years, that it's not a matter of us being there for people that have got money. If you're time poor, we can I do that legwork for you. So the homes I can see within a week that you waiting every weekend to go and try and do, I can get that process running faster. And because I see homes every day, I generally can walk in and suss it out pretty quickly on if I think that there's been water damage and things like that. And that just saves time. So when somebody says to me, "Oh, I can't afford you," and a year later they're still looking, look how much rent they have spent and how many weekends they've had no life when I could have just got it done for them. And
We
that's when people realize that the service is important.
Oh, it's very important. If I'd known of your existence 14 years ago when I purchased my apartment, I would have engaged you. When we examined the apartment, we thought how beautiful and spacious and lots of light, all the doors open. And when we moved in, four of the doors inside wouldn't close properly. They'd just spring open. They'd spring
Yeah.
open. And three of the windows were painted shut. So it's even little things like that, little things.
Yep. No, and but those little things become costly things. And it's not only that, you want to buy your forever home that or that property and enjoy it and be excited with it. And you don't want any dampeners because I don't know, it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal. It's like when you buy a car. It's that kind. I've seen it and I've seen it and I've seen it and I buy it and I drive it and I think it's great. And the first time I take it for a service, it's like, oh my goodness, that's the bill. Or the first time that you need to get a tire replaced, and it's like, oh, they didn't tell me the tires were going to cost that kind of money. And then suddenly that joy of your car suddenly becomes an effort because you're too scared because you don't know what the next expense is going to be.
Now,
What's
you're not only a buyer's advocate, but you're also a registered real estate agent, aren't you?
I am. I am. I am. I think that it's really important to know your rules and regulations and law of the country. So yes, I'm a qualified real estate agent. So I do see things from different angles.
what's the biggest or most common mistake you see people make, Cynthia?
They buy with their hearts and they don't have the first, at most, especially now, they don't get the contract read. They put in a bid, and yes, because they've inspected, they know that they're under pressure, and they just put in a bid.
Auctions, scary things if you don't handle stress and pressure well, and especially if you are susceptible to pressure tactics, sales tactics. How is using someone like yourself an advantage in a competitive auction situation? And I should note that auction is the most common method currently that established houses, are sold by in Australia. It has changed since I was a kid, but auctions are definitely what you need to front up to every Saturday morning or afternoon. to secure a property. So, Cynthia, how is using you an advantage to your client?
Well, I I think with my head and not with my heart. So if I have already had a proper valuation done on the property, which I always do, then I know what it should go for, and I know the circumstances of my client to how far I can go. So I'm not swayed by the bidding, because you can get into the swing of the bidding and you get carried away, and
Well,
it's a
that's the
natural reaction.
competition aspect, isn't it? You want to
Yeah.
win. You want to win the auction, but you can win the auction and lose your life.
Very true.
Yeah, no, well, 100% correct. And I do a lot of auction bidding. People find their own home and they'll contact me and they'll say, can you go to the auction for us? And I'll just purely go and I'll do auction bidding for them, just from that aspect of I know when to stop. It's not because I don't want them to have the home, but it's just realistic.
Do you find, because you've been doing it for such a long time, obviously you're well known in auction real estate circles, do you find that auctioneers modify their behaviour if you're present bidding because you know what they know and you know what they can do?
No, no, not anymore. Not at the moment. Just because there are so many people bidding for a home, they will push for the highest price. So the more they can, you know, keep moving from one person to the other. They start at 10,000 and then they go to 5,000 and then they'll only go to 1,000 bidding. They know how to creep it up. You know,
I'm kind of thinking,
there's a skill to it.
oh, here's Cynthia. She saw me last week. I better behave. I mean, is there any of that? Because auctioneers are scallywags. They can be.
Yeah, no, I'm not seeing that at the moment. They just are bidding for. They will just auction for the best price. And at the moment, people are going to auction because we have um, low stock of homes being sold and a lot more buyers. So at an auction, you've got a lot better chance of getting a higher price than if you would settle off market, like we used to do a lot more off market sales. But at the moment, it's going to auction definitely does get the higher price.
Listeners might hear the term passed in. The property was passed in. Can you explain to listeners what the term property term passed in means?
Yeah, so the seller will set a reserve price. That's the price, that's the minimum price that they prepared to start negotiations on. So when they come back, if they haven't reached that reserve price, the auctioneer will say that the property's been passed in. And then they say, we will now negotiate with the highest bidder. And then afterwards, behind closed doors, they will then negotiate with the highest bidder that they had. But passed in means that they haven't reached their reserve price.
And so if you're the highest bidder, you often can be behind closed doors negotiating with the agents and the vendor's advocate as well, or?
Correct. They'll take it, and they will try and come to a compromise with the seller and
So
the buyer.
you absorb a lot of the pressure of the process for people.
I'll probably take 99% of the pressure. I think the aim of an advocate is to save you time, save you money, and most of all, your stress levels.
Well, there's
So
an important point, Cynthia, about money. A lot of people, when they're buying their first home, particularly, are budgeting right down to the very last dollar when they are calculating what they can afford. So if they were to engage you, how do they pay you? Do you work on a commission, or are you doing things for a set fee? And is there a way someone can actually put into their budget what using an advocate is going to cost them?
Okay, so I do generally work on a percentage level, but I will always, if somebody signs up with me, I need to make sure what they can afford and they've had a pre-approval. So I'll always get the authorization to talk to their financial institution or see their paperwork. I will go through all the expenses that they need. So I call it a buffer. So let's say that they think they want to spend $600,000 on the property. They still need to take into consideration stamp duty, maybe MAR fees, rates, and have some money for the first bills that are going to come in, because they're going to have the water bills, the electrical bills, like in that first month, they're going to have these expenses. And a lot of the time, depending on their salary, can they afford to take it out of pocket, or would they need that extra money from their mortgage? There's a lot of extra expenses that people just think this is the house, but it's not just the house. Even when you think about it, you still need to move. So you need to pay for the mover. Cleaning the home, whether the garden needs, like there are expenses that if you've been renting, you're not aware of those expenses that you have when you buy a home. So you need to be very considerate of having extra costs. So I think my service pays for itself in the time frame, but people just need to take into consideration extra costs. So normally when I work with a client and I work with their finance institution, we always put in a buffer for extra costs. And you know what? If they've got money left over, they can have that sitting on the side, but rather have more than less.
Yeah, you'd much rather have a celebratory dinner left over at the end of the first month than to be um, having to sell your second car to meet your expenses. And
You know,
sorry, Cynthia, I just wanted to throw in another example that I know some people, some friends of mine, didn't take into account and worked out that it was quite significant, is when there's two or even three people in the household and you've moved from the inner areas and you move out, your transport costs double. Whether you're driving a car or whether you're catching public transport, and most people ignore that line item in their budget, and it can be hundreds of dollars a week.
oh, definitely. I mean, and that's, I find that when the next generation move out of home and they want to buy something, and it's great because their parents encourage them, and I think that it's wonderful that if they don't have to, as I said before, pay somebody else's rent and rather pay their own mortgage, it's great. But they're not used to those everyday expenses. When you buy a home and you have to pay the council for your bins, well, all these little costs add up. So when you're not used to outlaying this money, these are all things that somebody needs to think for you. And that's where I think that the advocate comes in, because they'll have that experience of settling their clients into their home and then knowing what their expenses are. So there's a lot more to buying a home than just, let's go every weekend and let's find the ideal home and we're going to buy it.
We have this obsession in this country with property shows, buying properties, renovating properties. What makes us so obsessed, or is it common globally, this love of decorating, renovating, purchasing property, flipping properties, buying properties? Why are we so obsessed with property?
Well, it's the best. It's your best. I don't know. Personally, I think it's a great security to have bricks and mortar.
It's the easiest way to build wealth or it has been historically in this country, and they say the same thing in America.
Because I know living in Europe, a lot of people don't own, they rent, and you said in Israel it's too expensive to purchase. So where do they put their money for growth?
Oh, it also depends on what people earn. A lot of people just live paycheck to a paycheck. I mean, in Israel, a lot of people did own, but then they'll buy an apartment in the city. It's very expensive, so can they afford to go out? A lot of people can't buy a house, so you end up buying an apartment, but that's what they used to, that's their lifestyle. So they used to doing that. I think, because we have land and it's available to us, people do it, and especially now with the interest rates being low. If you by any chance have got any money in the bank, you're not earning any interest. So you might as well take that money and put it into something that's going to earn you more interest. So if you're getting 2% at the bank and you can afford, let's say you want to buy an investment property and you can get, let's say, worst case scenario, 4%, you're still getting 2% more than what your money would be doing getting in the bank. And if you buy in an area that's a rentable area, you're not going to go wrong. I mean, the market does go up and down. That there's that 7 years of the peak and coming down. So the idea is to buy long term. I mean, some people do flip, but at the moment, yeah, and even for buyers, it's the lowest interest rate. So they're getting a better interest rate to borrow money. And I think that's why the property market's just really, really boomed at the moment.
Are you purchasing or are you assisting people offshore in their purchase of properties?
I haven't had any in the last, well, since we started COVID, I haven't had anybody from overseas coming in, only interstate. A whole lot of Melbourneians left, and I've got all the other people coming back in.
What do people who are purchasing from offshore need to consider?
So I go through exactly what I would go through with the people here, the unknown expenses, because it makes no difference whether it's been the person living at home not knowing and the person overseas not knowing Australian ways. So, it would be, again, having a lawyer, having an inspector, all the bills that we have, making sure that they understand if things are paid weekly, monthly, quarterly. Those are the types of things that I go through with people of the options if they're budgeting. Like especially even, let's say, electricity and gas and phone bills, just those are important to actually know whether you need to pay them quarterly, or a monthly and things like that. So I find that the outlay of the money important with the offshore clients.
Do you help mums and dads purchase properties when pre-COVID and presumably post-COVID? Do you help mums and dads purchase properties for their children who study in Australia?
Oh, definitely. They were very big in buying in the city to buy for their kids. And then this way they could put their money in here. They didn't have to worry about their kids renting. And one of the biggest things with the offshore putting there, especially if they were uni students, I always used to arrange with the real estate agent, because once I sell you a property, I'll make sure that we connect you with an agent just to oversee it. A lot of them we used to employ, we used to pay a cleaning service. So at least once a month they knew that the apartment was being professionally cleaned. Yeah. Uh, and
So
then they kept the property going.
you go, Grant.
No, David, you keep going if you're on the same thread. I want to go left field.
You go left field. That's all right.
Well, Cynthia, you mentioned some of the locations we mentioned were coastal, and we talked about South Australia. That's very comparatively dry compared to where we are in Melbourne. How much is the changing climate coming into your calculations, and how much do people looking to invest in property need to think about how much what they buy now might be significantly different because of climate change?
No, I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing people buying properties, coastal properties, because they are thinking about holiday homes more than they're buying properties because of climate change. So the experience I've had is I have been going down the coast because they're buying properties just thinking about it as a holiday home maybe one day, or even interstate. It's for the purpose of what are they getting for the property. So when you go to South Australia, you're not buying something for the climate change, because you're either going to have good wine good beaches, yes, okay, not as much, good food. They've It's a more laid back town. I mean, it's very small, but yet you can come here and people are driving an hour away down the coastline and they're buying property, but they're turning that into holiday homes because we're not traveling at the moment. So it's short term. It's a short term change.
David, because it's the midweek show and we like to have a little bit more fun, um, can you remember probably probably before Cynthia arrived in Australia, but what was Adelaide famous for when we were in our late 20s and 30s, David?
City
No,
of
Cynthia
churches.
went to the obvious there. She
But
went for the churches.
dead.
Yeah,
Adelaide
the
was dead.
the bizarre murders. Bizarre
Oh,
murders were
oh, we can't talk
always
about
in
them.
Adelaide.
All South Australia. All South Australia. Border town. That's it. The
Well,
Beaumont twins.
that was a bit later, but there was all those really crazy, the kinds of things that we used to hear about conservative politicians in Britain. They were always the ones who had a story. If there was a bizarre story that was connected to anything weird, it was
Was in
always
South
coming out of
Australia.
Adelaide. but
Now,
but it's totally different now, isn't it, David?
look. Do you know what? It's a beautiful, beautiful place to visit, and it does remind me a lot of growing up in the '70s in Melbourne. Now, but Cynthia raises some points. I mean, there's the Coorong, there's Robe, there's the Flinders Ranges. It's a beautiful state. Now, you've lived in Zimbabwe, South Africa,
Yes,
Israel, and
yes,
Australia.
yes.
If you were to have your journey again, would you avoid any of those countries? Or how would you approach each country differently? Because we haven't had anybody on the show that's lived in 4 countries and has had technically four citizenships. I mean, you're no longer a Zimbabwean citizen, but you were born in Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia as it was then known.
It was Rhodesia when I was born. Yes, it was. Would I go back there? No. Would I go back to South Africa? No. Would I go back to Israel? Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because when we went there and I was on my own, the friends we made became our family. The people are very warm, and every time there was a holiday, the first thing people used to say is, would you like to come to us? When we came here after that attitude, and I think just because of the way that they live, the first holiday went by, it was a Christmas or maybe Easter, and everybody said, have a nice long weekend. And they just don't, like it was that, like they don't ask you these things. It's not like they wouldn't have you in their home, but it's just everybody's got a family.
Cynthia, if someone was to arrive in Australia now, knowing what you know, 20 years of living here, what would you tell them they need to look out for, or that they need to be attuned to in the way we just go about our daily lives? I'm thinking about that. You said that you were warned not to speak out. I'm very surprised about that, but I think it's not surprising that people would sometimes find Australians just being normal to be rude because of the way we sometimes say things that might be considered inappropriate in other cultures. And look, I'm of an age now where even younger Australians can't get a handle on some of the sayings that I just say that I grew up with. So, what would you be telling someone that they have to be attuned to fit in quickly?
I would say don't be shy, okay? And don't feel intimidated that you're not Australian. Go for it. We are so multicultural and people don't realize it. And you suddenly think, oh, like I got into property because that was the first job I got. I applied for the job, I got it. Um, but I would never have thought about it. And I have to say, I did think twice, oh, can I do this? Can't I do this? Do I know how? I would say to people, don't be shy and go for it. Because if you don't try, you don't know.
David, how many communities or nationalities do you think are
Oh, there'd be
present?
over 100, over 170 in Melbourne for sure. Sydney would be slightly larger. And, the diversity is breathtaking. Going on Grant's point, what's the good in Australia and what's the bad? What 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 makes us who we are? You and I have spoken off air about it, but what are the good points about coming and living in Australia, and what are the bad points that could be bettered?
There's a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot of job opportunity here. There's just a lot of learning. There's a lot of culture. There's a lot offered, which I think is awesome. And there's a lot of freedom. Yes, I mean, put aside all the city violence and stuff like that. Generally, our trains and you can get around and you can go. So I think that there's great opportunities. Um, oh,
What could we
there's
do better here? What could we do better?
I don't know, take more into consideration about the cultural differences of the people coming in and not, yeah, no, just have more. And I'm not talking about having things in different languages. I'm just talking about just, you know, the basics of life, explaining that better. Um, and listen, I think this is a great country. And um, talking to Grant offline earlier on, when we came here as immigrants and I speak English, I had a lot of problems with the translation of Australian English and the English, the change in the words. But
Egg on,
also,
mate. Egg on.
how you
Egg on,
going?
mate.
No worries. Um, um, and that word mate, to me at the beginning, I thought that was a way of, if I forgot what your name was, if we
Yeah.
just used the word
Well,
mate, it came
well,
across
it's
because everybody
convenient.
used it.
We do that. We
But
it's used so many different ways. I think that's one of the subtleties that people have trouble with. That we use it as a placeholder in conversations. We use it as a term to threaten someone, but not in a very scary way. But if I want David to have a look at himself, I'll go, "Hey, steady on, mate." You know, my old man used to say to me all the time, if I was doing something wrong in the garden, I'd hear, "Barley, mate." You know, that was stop it. I think the way we use mate is really, really difficult for people to get a handle on.
So you found our language, our lazy inability to open our mouths and articulate an issue, and it's absolutely understood. What other areas did you find perplexing, to put it mildly?
I think just the cost of things. Um, eh,
Did you
we
expect
live
it
in
to
a
be
very
cheaper?
expensive. Sorry.
Did you expect Australia to be cheaper when you arrived?
I don't think we expected it to be cheaper, but we didn't expect it to be more expensive. And it's the same way as we paid a lot of rent, not understanding that it was weekly rent against monthly rent. Um, and that took a big chunk, so there's a lot of the minor things that are very important. Um, um, yeah, and just the cost of living here is really high. Supermarkets, eating out. Take your family to the aquarium, and you're paying $80 to try and get four people in.
It is
It's
very
David,
expensive. It is very
David,
expensive.
you've recently been to
expensive.
the football. Now,
Oh,
I haven't been for a long time, but
it's a great afternoon out, but it's very expensive.
well, somebody told me the other day they were looking to go just to drop in and have a look at the footy like we used to do. Um, I used to pay 15, 17 bucks, I think, to go in and just have a look at the footy. They said the cheapest ticket they could get was $60.
That's right. That's right.
$60.
And then if you want to buy pie,
You're
sandwich,
looking
and
at
chicken,
$100 to go
it's
to
very
the footy.
expensive. It's very
Oh,
expensive.
man.
So I think those are the kind of things that we just need to be like. It would be great not to chase people away, but just for them to understand what they're in for. Because if you are a family, your kids want to do things, and you don't want to alienate them. You're immigrants, and you don't want to alienate them of doing things. So I think those are things that are important. Just those types of things.
We've asked
What
the
are the
question that we've asked that
sorry,
question.
David, can I just extend that before you go on, Dave? Cynthia, what do you think of those activities for a family that are the important ones, that are the social glue that holds our communities together?
It is the social glue.
So
I don't know a single parent that doesn't give up their weekends to go watch their kids play sport. I don't know a single parent that doesn't belong to the local
that
footy
was the word
team,
I was looking for, David.
cricket team or whatever. Yeah. Their parents are as involved in the sport as the kids. Now, in South Africa, sport is huge. Like, sport is huge. There's something wrong with you if you don't. So I'm grown up with it. I'm used to it. I mean, one of my Foxtel channels is a sports channel because I will never miss a game anywhere around the world. So I think that also that that sports is definitely a glue.
One of the questions we've asked on the show a few times, and we always get the same answer. It'd be interesting to hear if it's the same answer from you. A bewildering aspect of Australian society is this scenario. Cynthia, we must catch up for coffee. I'll give you a call. And the Australian never calls. I've had a lot of people say to me, what is this about? Does that scenario ring true to you where we must catch up and you think, fantastic, this person's interested and wanting to do something, but they never call?
Yeah, because people don't know how to say no and they don't know how to cut it. I know that with telemarketing or even within business or even with when you go and meet, so I'm a buyer's advocate, and let's say I went to go and meet mortgage brokers or, I don't know, lawyers. Let's say I thought that I want to help you and I can go and meet you. That politeness, it's just an easy way of getting you going by saying, I'll be in touch.
A lot of people think it's real.
Sorry?
A lot of people on the other end, the receivers of this brush off effectively, think it's genuine. And that's where a lot of people who are new to Australia are bewildered because that person never calls.
That's one of the skills that we have to learn in business a bit, David, isn't it? To know when at the conclusion of the conversation, if it's ended in something like, I'll give you a ring, or I'll hit you up in a couple of weeks. You have to be successful, particularly if you're in, like you and I are, David, where we're self-employed, and you, Cynthia, too.
Yeah.
You need to know what's a genuine contact and what isn't, and that's a really hard skill to learn.
Absolutely.
Probably the same in every society, but
when the new immigrants listen to this podcast, I'm just going to recommend one thing. It's the same as I said. I joined groups when I first came here for other reasons to get to know Australia. Networking is key when you are in business because you won't weed out that comment because you will still get it because people don't know how to just move you on. So they politely move you on. But within networking, you just build up groups and you become more aware of it and you can learn how to get rid of that dead wood, if I can call it, or people that might waste your time. And find the groups that belong to you. So let's say as a buyer's advocate, there's a buyer's advocate institute and there are groups and you can just build your bonds and you learn really, really quickly that way. So I would recommend people out there is don't pressurize yourself and go it on your own, okay? use the support systems around you, because do you know what? There so many people in the same position you are, okay, but nobody speaks up. And when you join these networking groups, you hear other people and you say, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. You know what? Even the Australians, okay, people are all in the same boat. You haven't reinvented the wheel yourself. You are just one of very many people in the same situation.
My last question.
Mm.
What do you miss most about South Africa? Double-headed question. And what do you miss most about Israel?
What I would miss most about South Africa still would be immaterial type of food. There's just a flavor that you don't get. I suppose I actually miss that from any country that I've ever lived in, because I find Australian food very bland. Um, I suppose the opportunity when I studied and when I worked there, it was a lot easier. And in Israel, I think the comparison, I just miss the warmness of the people just taking you in as family or into their home. It took me a very, very, very long time here to get that. And even then, I don't even know if we quite got it the same way.
Grant?
Cynthia, I I kind of want to ask two questions as well.
Yeah.
You you haven't mentioned the beach, and I wonder whether the beach is still um, such a cultural touchstone in Australia as I think it was when you would have first arrived. We referenced so many things against the beach. So I, I guess that's one a way of introducing a question saying, what have you noticed that has changed greatly over the 20 years that you have been here in Australia?
With the beach or just
Just generally, I think we're less beach centric now than we were certainly when David and I were young. There was the beach was in everything. That was you always wanted to go there. Um, I think we've changed, and I think well, I'm kind of answering the question for you, or maybe where I want you to go. But I think we've had such since David and I were in our 20s and 30s, which is getting on to be a long time ago. The cultural mix in our cities has changed so dramatically that lots of other influences tend to be the common things that we reference in our daily lives and in our community relations. So I'm wondering how the Australia you saw when you first arrived is different to the Australia that you look out onto now, out your window in the morning, bearing in mind that you are now subsumed within it, so it's a bit harder to have those initial eyes.
I'm finding that some of the areas, unfortunately, we're losing our strip shops, of strips of shops. A lot of them might become more restaurants, but we're losing that little suburb feel. Because the minute a house goes down, an apartment building goes up, so we're losing a lot of that little area. I'm finding with the next generation, even though they still go to the beach, maybe I'm just getting too old. I like my water sports, but it's not like if the sun's shining, we go to the beach on the weekend. We'd rather go and play golf, which is another great opportunity here that has become expensive, but a lot more. There are a lot more golf clubs that are not private, so you have that opportunity. But they are very into food. I think food has become a big thing here, and the restaurants and just all those different food types. I find that that's a big change, and it's improved. As much as people do fast food, they still have now got that palate for um, uh, uh, um, I don't want to call it fancier foods, but different foods and experimenting more. I'm
Of
finding that
course,
I'm a big thing here.
David, where did MasterChef begin?
Oh, I don't want to know, Grant. Where did it begin?
Australia. It's a MasterChef is an Australian invention. The whole home chefs competing to be the best high level food, and that's gone worldwide. I think Cynthia hit the nail on the head. How our, our cultural touchstone, I think, has moved towards food.
Cynthia, if people listening to the podcast want to reach out, what's the best way? What's your website? Can you give us? We'll put it in the credits in the program notes. What is your website?
So my website is www.metrolinks.com.au, but I am on Facebook and I am on LinkedIn. Love my LinkedIn. Yeah, I like people just to pick up the phone and phone. If I can't answer the phone, leave a message. I do work weekends. Yeah, so happy to just have a conversation. I'm here to educate. So I'd love to try and help people not that we make mistakes, but just already skip that step and go straight to doing it right.
You've been fantastic, Cynthia. Thank you for coming on the Migrating to Australia podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ron, David.
Pleasure to meet you, Cynthia. Now, David, where would you like someone who needs a bit of help with their immigration matters to reach out to you?
Thank you, Grant. The fastest way is Twitter at David Bongiorno. And people are doing it and they're getting fast replies because my phone is never too far away from me, Grant. Cynthia, you're probably the same. Your phone's always within arm's reach for those phone calls. It's the way we roll. It's the way we roll. So at David Bongiorno. And
that's
Grant,
the way
you
we
can
roll at the Migrating to Australia podcast.
and Grant, you can give our Instagram or my Instagram the correct Instagram. Cynthia, we had some other poor David Bongiorno for my Instagram. We only picked it up recently. So Grant, my Instagram
at David_A_C_Bongiorno.
Not poor David Bongiorno. Not poor David Bongiorno.
No, it might just be easier to go to the description in the show notes, which are in the podcast show notes. I might add if you're watching on YouTube. Sorry, I don't do the YouTube stuff yet, but I have got a team now working on Facebook, so you're going to see some big improvements in our Facebook presence. So please like the page. That's what you do on Facebook, isn't it? You like the page. We're always alerting when something's happening there. And
Grant, because
we're about to Instagram, David. We're about to Migrating to Australia podcast Instagram. So get your duck lips going and whatnot, because you're going to be a star.
I think because Cynthia's from South Africa, you know what we can say to her to end the show? Bye now. Bye now. I didn't do that right, though, did I?
No.
Bye now.
No.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Cheerio. Cheers.
Ciao. Ciao.
It's been a ripper. Oh, and David, I should mention that everything in this podcast has been general information in nature, not specific legal advice. You certainly haven't been getting any financial advice from Cynthia. We've just been having a yak about property.
General discussion only.
Spot on. Oh, David, we've got to use the old line. And if you take the information contained within this podcast as specific legal advice,
you're a galah. You're a galah.
You're a
drongo.
You're a drongo, mate. All right, that's been Midweek Podcast, Migrating to Australia. We'll see you next time. Cheers.